The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the second day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 20th of Av, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Monday, August 3rd, 2026. We will read Parashat Re'eh this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Parashah. We're on the second aliyah for the triennial Torah reading of Parashat Re'eh. The verses that can be read today are chapter 11, 32 of the book of Devarim through chapter 12, verse 5. So these are the verses that will be read in the Torah on the second aliyah for next Shabbat. And they go like this. Take care to observe all the laws and rules that I've set before you this day. These are the laws and rules that you must carefully observe in the land that the eternal God of your ancestors is giving you to possess as long as you live on earth. You must destroy all the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods, whether on lofty mountains and on hills or under any luxuriant tree. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their names from that site. Do not worship the eternal your God in like manner, but look only to the site that the eternal your God will choose amidst all your tribes as God's habitation to establish the name there. There you are to go. So I'm going to go through these verses and try to understand what are, according to our rabbis, they are suggesting in terms of the mitzvot, in terms of our obligations to Hashem, according to our rabbinic tradition. So these are laws that are considered conditions of our continual inheritance of the land of Israel. Our continual inheritance of the land of Israel really is truly conditional unless we follow these laws. It's not like it's been decided at one point that it is no matter what, but rather it continues. It is always conditional upon our observance of this covenant, and specifically the details of the covenant itself. That's what makes living in the land of Israel so very difficult, because there are all of these special laws that must be followed in order to live on it. And so now Moshe is going to name a bunch of these laws. So really the first law that the Torah begins to speak about here, and the major laws that the Torah speaks about here is idolatry. How do we speak about idolatry? Because remember, the Jews are coming into the land of Israel. The Israelites are coming into the land of Israel, and there were nations, Canaanite nations living before there. There's idolatry there. What do we do with those things? And that's really what these verses address. So in verse 2, we have the idea, at least according to the rabbis, that we must continue to uproot an object that was used for idolatry, even if it grows back multiple times. So it says simply in verse 2 that you have to destroy all the sites and which were used to do idolatry, or if there was a sacred tree that was used or something like that, it must be destroyed. And so verse 2 specifically says, then, therefore, according to the rabbis and according to the rabbinic interpretation, that it's not just destroy the tree once. Let's say there was a tree that was worshipped, which is called an Asherah in biblical terminology. Let's say there was an Asherah, it was being worshipped. You might think, okay, I'll chop it down, right? And bam, it's gone, right? Well, what happens if it grows back, right? What happens if it's, some plants, they grow back again, or the shoots from that tree grow? No, right? Then they would have to be chopped down again. So there really is going to have to be a lot of understanding of, like, how do you fully uproot this tree so that to make sure that it does not grow back again at all and that it is completely destroyed. So even it says 10 times, 11, unlimited times, you still have to continue to uproot this tree once it has been worshipped by people, even though we don't believe that the tree is a god or something like that. But since it's been used for this forbidden purpose and it could be gotten rid of, it should be gotten rid of in that exact way. So very important. The verse also says specifically that you have to destroy idols that were worshipped upon high places or in mountains. Now, at least according to the rabbis, the reason why the verse specifically says that is because you might think that somehow you have to destroy a mountain, or that a mountain, more realistically, that a mountain will become forbidden because it has been worshipped, right? Maybe if we know a specific mountain has been worshipped by people, we don't go there, and we're not allowed to go there as Jews. But that's not true, and it's based on a rabbinic principle that land itself cannot be forbidden to people forever. It cannot be permanently forbidden. Rather, the land is the land. It kind of is a neutral party. But what we do forbid is what is upon it. So if there's an idol upon the mountain, we do have to destroy that idol, of course. But the mountain itself cannot become forbidden. Very important, right? Because then most of the mountains, lots of the natural places around the world would become forbidden, and the non-Jews would have great power. All they would have to do is worship their god on one of these on a piece of land or a mountain or whatever, and it would mean that a Jew can never actually walk into that area. This would be extremely problematic, and so there's sort of reason why the rabbis might understand it in this manner, and I do think this is the simple meaning of the Torah here. Verse 3 talks about the idea of different kinds of idolatry that needs to be wiped out. Mizbeach, which is at least understood by Rashi and the rabbinic tradition as multiple stones used for idolatry, right? You pile a bunch of stones on top of each other, and this is not something you worship, but rather either you place an idol on, you offer a sacrifice on, and so you've used it somehow for idolatry. So multiple stones, obviously you have to make sure, take those stones and unpile them or get rid of them. Then we also have a matzeva. It's kind of a similar word, but specifically in its technical definition means one stone used for idolatry. Let's say a stone that's been carved or used in some way for idolatry. We have to get rid of that as well. A share we've already went over, and finally names. So it also specifically says, the Torah specifically says that their names need to be destroyed as well. And this is actually the one time we actually can use Lashon Hara, what would be considered like negative speech. Obviously, it's not considered Lashon Hara in this case, or evil speech, but negative speech by changing the name of idolatrous gods or things used, places used for idolatry to sort of insult them. And then this is where the rabbis come up with all kinds of interesting puns and insulting names for idolatrous objects. And the reason for that is actually a mitzvah, right? It's that their names need to be insulted and changed to make them sound insulting. So if there's something that's called Beautiful Mountain because it was God was worshipped there, we change it to Ugly Mountain or something like that. And that's where a lot of the traditions actually come out about making fun of different names of gods. This can be really problematic when we live in our modern society with other non-Jews. And we should, try to stay away from this with religions that are still constantly ongoing, and certainly to non-Jews themselves. But remember also that this law specifically also applies to at least, or these group of laws specifically apply to the land of Israel only, right? We don't destroy other people's idols when they're not on the land of Israel. We only really destroy them when they're on the land of Israel. And you see that this is the case in this particular segment here. Lastly, the portion talks about worshiping God only in the designated place, right? This is another idea that's spoken about here, that the non-Jews sort of worship their gods everywhere where they find. They bring a mishkan, they put an altar down, they worship their God there. That's not what we do in Judaism. We go to the designated place. We have to go to Jerusalem. At some point it was Shiloh, and then it was Jerusalem and Mount Zion, and worship Hashem there. And so we as Jews are always going to the place in which God is. Well, at least according to the Torah, non-Jews just, their God comes to them, per se. They make an altar wherever they find themselves, and that's one thing that differentiates us. Halacha. We're going to now turn back to the Mishnah Torah. We're on the laws of prayer. We're on chapter 3, and we'll go through halachot 5 and 6 today. Tfilat Musavin Zmanan Achar Tfilat Shachar at Sheva Sheot Bayom. The proper time of the Musaf prayer is after the morning prayer until 7 hours of the day. So, what what we say here. So the Musaf prayer means the additional prayer. The Musaf prayer lines up to the Musaf, or the additional sacrifice that's offered on Shabbat and on some holidays as well, when an additional sacrifice was offered in the Beit HaMikdash. In this case, the question that the Mishnah Torah is now asking is at what point do we say the Musaf prayer? Now, this I think becomes confusing for people because, again, when you're experiencing this as a Jew at Shabbat morning services and you get to Musaf, it's kind of like the rest of the service. It's all one service: the morning prayer, the Torah reading, the Shema, and the Musaf at the end. But it really isn't. These are all separate services. We just put them all together so we can make sure to accomplish them as a community, and also, of course, they should be prayed in a minyan if possible, ideally. So we just do them all together. So he specifically says that the Musaf prayer ideally is said in the first 7 hours of the day, and that's basically 1 hour after halachic noon, and so basically the morning time and the very, very early afternoon, it should be when they are said. Usually, almost always said after the morning prayer, and should be said before mincha, the afternoon prayer. But what Rambam does say is one who recites it even after 7 hours, even though he's acted negligently, fulfills his obligation since his time is the entire day, right? So ideally, what we'd say in halachic language, ideally, one should, from the outset, pray the Musaf Amidah within the first 7 hours of the day, of daylight that day. But if one forgot or couldn't do it for some reason, for other reason, or was otherwise held down, technically one can fulfill the obligation of praying the Musaf Amidah all of the daylight hours, and this sometimes happens. A lot of times as a rabbi, I'm doing something during the Musaf Amidah, I'm handling a situation at the synagogue or talking to a congregant or something like that, so I then need to end up praying Musaf later in the afternoon, and this is acceptable. This is after the fact, or non-ideally, this is acceptable and important to know. The next halacha begins and talk about the evening prayer. Interestingly enough, the Rambam says straight out, the evening prayer is not obligatory. Okay, it's not a required prayer. So Mariv is not a required prayer service. Rambam seems to be ruling on a particular side of this machloka, this controversy within the rabbinic tradition. It's obvious that the evening prayer is not a Torah obligation, but there's basically a machloka of whether it's a rabbinic obligation or it's just not, or it's just completely optional. And most authorities sort of fall on the side of obligatory. Here we see that Rambam actually rules differently and says it's just not obligatory. It's sort of optional. That's not really the ruling today of most authorities. Most authorities do say it's obligatory, at least according to rabbinic law. Now, the Rambam still thinks ideally you should still be reciting it. And if you do recite it, you have to recite it at its proper time, which is from the beginning of the night until dawn, right? So you say it at the beginning of the night. Now, what exactly this means, he doesn't seem to define here. He doesn't seem to be getting into the debate that we talked about with Mincha earlier. Can you say Mariv after Plag Mincha or after Shkia? It's however you define the beginning of the night. If you define the beginning of the night at Plag Mincha, at halfway of Mincha, the halfway point of Mincha, or at sunset, it seems like Rambam could be read as either of these times would be okay, but obviously further research is needed. Lastly, he mentions the Ne'ilah prayer. The proper time of the Ne'ilah prayer is such that one completes it close to sunset. This is the prayer that we only pray now on Yom Kippur, the special locking prayer, locking the door prayer, Ne'ilah, which is that's what I mean, a special extra Amidah that's offered right before the end of the holiday. This was traditionally also envisioned for fast times as well, and communal fast days as well, but really is only executed today in community on Yom Kippur. And so this should always uniquely be said right before sunset, right before the day itself closes out. And obviously in this case, Ne'ilah should be said before Mariv. If you shouldn't say Mariv at Plag Mincha. And obviously the only time we do this at is Yom Kippur anyway. So obviously we wouldn't daven Mariv before Ne'ilah, or certainly even before Tzedek HaChavim when it comes to when the stars come out, which is on Yom Kippur because of the fast. So that's when Ne'ilah is prayed, and he mentions it here with the rest of the prayer service. Menorat HaMaor. We're going to go back to Menorat HaMaor. I've been missing it, honestly, and I really would like to go back to it. So, hey, I run the podcast, so I'm going back to Menorat HaMaor. We'll try to stick with it for a little bit in terms of the Musar portion that we'll do. I just love the Sefer so much. I can't get enough of it. What can I say? All right, so let's go back to Menorat HaMaor. We're going to start a new candle today, a new section. In previous times, we've been learning the introduction. We learned some from the first section. Now we're going to go back to learning specifically the section on speech. And I think this is a good time to be thinking about speech as we enter and get closer to the holidays and to the time of Elul. So many of our transgressions, especially we do in the modern world today, have to do with speech. And have to do about the way we abuse our mouths and abuse our sacred ability to speak. So I think it's beautiful to learn some inspiring rabbinic agada and musar about this particular topic. Okay, let's begin. The blessed God gave man a mouth so that he might accustom himself to speak things that benefit both the body and the soul. Right? So here we're given a function, and again, there's no rabbinic text quoted yet. There's no proof text that he's quoting yet. But regardless, he's just saying it. So again, every passage that an author just says, I sort of hold it a little bit of a distance until I can have a proof text from our rabbis of blessed memory, or a pasuk or a verse or something. But regardless, I think what he says is quite beautiful here, is that really our mouths should be used only for two things: the benefit of our bodies and the benefit of our souls. Things that benefit our body and things that benefit our soul. And then he lists here now what for the body. For the body, whatever is necessary for his livelihood, his business and means of earning a living, his food and drink, his clothing, and all his other needs. So he listens out, right? So we should be using our mouth to make a living, to make money in our business, and to make a living for our family. To acquire food when we need to go to the store, or in other ways to make a deal for drink, or for acquiring clothing, and all of his other needs. So it's very obvious here of what the rabbis mean here is a human being's basic needs. Right? A human being has physical needs. They should be taken seriously, and a person should work very hard to gain those things for themselves and their families. And so we should use our mouths for these needs. The second requirement of a thing we can use our mouth for is for things for the soul. What are those things? Those things that he's commanded to do, such as the study of the written Torah and the oral Torah, which are the foundation and sustaining force of all the commandments, right, for studying Torah. And this is important, right? You might think that, you could just learn Torah just in your head, and technically you can. But ideally, when you learn written Torah, when you learn oral Torah, you should say the teachings out loud with your mouth, and that's sort of part of the way in which we learn, and that's why your mouth is so involved in the learning process. Likewise, he should use his mouth and give thanks to the blessed God for all the goodness he continually bestows upon us, to bless him for all the things from which he derives benefit in this world, to pray before him and to ask him for kindness, and to pour out his supplications before him for whatever he needs with a whole, humble, and contrite heart. Right? So we can also, of course, use it for prayer. Right? We should use it for prayer, again, as we're commanded to. And specifically, when we use it for prayer, this is interesting here for me, that he sort of has some conditions in here. We don't use it to ask from God things sort of in a rushed way or in a sort of unkind way, but we always use it in a humble way. We supplicate before him. We're humble. We're contrite before him. So it's interesting that he feels the need to sort of put a condition on the way we use mouth for prayer, right? Because I guess you can imagine a case in which one might, ask God for things in a sort of a nasty or a demanding or an egotistical way. I deserve this, God. I did X, Y, and Z. Look how good I am. How are you not giving this to me? right? That's not what our mouth is designed for, but it's only really designed to be used in a humble way, in a contrite way, for relating to God in a specific way. So I think it's important the way he quotes this. And here I think he really, I kind of zoomed in on this because this is the only place, at least in this particular teaching, where he feels the needs to offer proof texts. And that's what you see here. Then God will hear him, as it is written, the Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth, right? So if the idea is that God will hear our prayers only if we call upon God in this way. And maybe that's what he meant. Maybe you can speak that way, you can use your mouth that way, but probably then God won't listen. God only listens if we call upon him with kindness, and with contriteness, with humbleness, and with humility. So he's gaining this from the verse, the Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth. This is Psalms 145:18, a verse within the Ashrei prayer, Psalm 145, that we say often. And so the idea, the Lord is near to all who call upon him. So if you call upon him, then God is near to all of those people. But then there's a condition, to all who call upon him in truth, which, at least in this understanding of Menorat HaMaor, sort of the way he's using this text here, is the ones who call upon him in truth are the ones who call upon him in humility, right? Not in ways of demandingness or in egotism, because then it's interesting. Then it's not that the statement is not necessarily, or you don't think the statement is true, but the relationship to God is not true. You're living in an illusion at that moment. If you think you can speak to God that way and talk to God that way, that is not the relationship you necessarily have. And so that is not a truthful way to speak to God. That is just not the status of the relationship. God is sovereign. God is in control. We are God's servants. It is not a equal relationship, and it's certainly not a relationship where we can demand things of God in that particular way. Lastly, he also brings the verse, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Psalm 51:19, right? If you therefore have a broken and contrite heart, if you have a humility heart, God will not reject that heart, right? God will not reject that voice, that presence. Again, saying a similar idea here.
Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions, and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.